The heat of the Mississippi summer pressed down like a physical weight as Eleanor Beaumont crossed the large plantation yard, her shoes collecting dust with each step. She had arrived just yesterday from Boston, summoned by a letter informing her of her father's death. Now she stood before Oakwood Plantation, her inheritance, a sprawling estate with fields that stretched beyond what her eyes could see. "Miss Beaumont, welcome to Oakwood," said Mr. Winters, her father's attorney, wiping sweat from his brow. "I trust your journey wasn't too arduous." Eleanor nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "It was long, but necessary. I've come to settle my father's affairs and return to Boston as quickly as possible." Mr. Winters gave her a curious look. "You haven't visited in, 15 years? Your father often spoke of you." "Did he?" Eleanor's voice was cold. "How surprising. He showed little interest in my life after I left." The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, there's much to discuss. Your father's estate is considerable. The plantation, the house, the assets." They walked toward the main house, a grand structure with imposing white columns. Eleanor had forgotten how massive it was, how it dominated the landscape like a declaration of power. Inside, the house was cooler, the high ceilings and thick walls keeping out the worst of the heat. Portraits of Beaumont's past lined the hallway, stern-faced men who had built their fortune on cotton and human suffering. "I'll need a complete inventory," Eleanor said, her voice echoing slightly in the entrance hall, "of everything." "Of course," Mr. Winters replied, leading her to what had been her father's study. "I've prepared the documents. The plantation has been productive. Your father was quite meticulous in his record-keeping." Inside the study, Mr. Winters gestured to the large desk, stacked with ledgers and papers. "Everything is there, accounts, deeds, inventories of all property." Eleanor sat down at the desk, her spine rigid. "Thank you, Mr. Winters. I'd like to review these alone." After the lawyer departed, Eleanor began sorting through the papers. Hours passed as she examined account books, tax records, and correspondence. When the sun began to set, she lit an oil lamp and continued working. It was nearly midnight when she found the registry. The leather-bound book was labeled simply Livestock and Property, 1835-1837. Eleanor opened it, expecting to find records of cattle, horses, and equipment. The first pages were indeed such listings: 20 head of cattle, 8 horses, farming implements. But as she turned to the next section, her blood ran cold. Listed methodically, in her father's precise handwriting, were names. Human names, followed by ages, physical descriptions, and monetary values. The plantation's slaves, more than 100 people, catalogued as property alongside the animals. Eleanor had known, of course. She had grown up here until she was 12, when her mother had died, and her father had sent her to live with her aunt in Boston. The northern education had changed her, opened her eyes to the moral bankruptcy of her family's wealth. It was why she had never returned, why she had refused her father's occasional letters. But seeing it laid out so plainly, human beings reduced to entries in a ledger, made the reality of it impossible to ignore. She was about to close the book when a name caught her eye. Sarah, age 24, and beneath it, 2 more entries: James, age 3, and Thomas, age 1. Eleanor frowned. Sarah. The name stirred memories. Sarah had been just a girl when Eleanor left, perhaps 9 or 10, the daughter of Lily, who had been her mother's personal maid. She flipped back a few pages, searching for more information, and found another entry from 2 years earlier. Sarah, daughter of Lily, deceased, age 22, valued at $800, childbearing potential good, father of child, unconfirmed. Eleanor's stomach twisted. There was something wrong about this entry, something that made her deeply uneasy. She checked the dates again and did a quick calculation. Sarah would have been only 19 when her first child was born. A suspicion began to form, an ugly thought that Eleanor tried to push away. She needed more information. Rising from the desk, Eleanor took the lamp and made her way through the silent house, out to the back door. The slave quarters were visible across the yard. Simple wooden structures, dark now except for a single light visible in the farthest building. Eleanor hesitated. It was improper for her to go there alone at night, but she needed answers. Her hand tightened on the lamp as she stepped into the darkness. The night air was heavy, with the scent of jasmine. Insects chirped loudly, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Eleanor walked carefully, her shoes unsuitable for the rough ground. As she approached the slave quarters, a figure emerged from one of the cabins. "Who's there?" a man's voice called. Eleanor raised her lamp. "I'm Eleanor Beaumont. I've come to speak with Sarah." The man, older with grey in his hair, regarded her with caution. "At this hour, miss?" "It's important," Eleanor said firmly, trying to project an authority she didn't feel. The man considered her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Last cabin, but she has young ones sleeping." "Thank you. I'll be mindful." Eleanor continued to the last cabin and knocked gently on the door. After a moment it opened just enough to reveal a young woman's face, wary and tired. "Sarah?" Eleanor asked. The woman's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Miss Eleanor? You've come back?" Eleanor nodded. "May I come in? I need to ask you something." Sarah hesitated, then stepped back, opening the door. The cabin was small, a single room with a dirt floor. A thin pallet in the corner held 2 sleeping children. "Your sons?" Eleanor asked. Sarah nodded, her expression guarded. "Yes, miss. I've been looking through my father's records," Eleanor said quietly. "Something doesn't seem right. Sarah, who is their father?" Sarah's face became a mask, her eyes dropping to the floor. "I can't say, miss." "Can't or won't?" Eleanor pressed. "Both, miss." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "It wouldn't change anything." Eleanor's suspicion grew stronger, more terrible. "Did my father—" Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes now filled with fear. "Please, miss, don't ask me that. The boys, they're all I have." The implication was clear enough. Eleanor felt sick. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have come like this, in the night. We'll speak again tomorrow." She turned to go, but Sarah's voice stopped her. "Miss Eleanor, why have you come back now?" Eleanor looked back at the young woman, at the children sleeping peacefully, unaware of their status as property in her father's ledger. "To settle affairs," she said. "My father is dead." Sarah's expression didn't change. "I know," she said. "Everyone knows." Something in her voice made Eleanor pause. "Were you afraid of him, Sarah?" For the first time, Sarah met Eleanor's eyes directly. "Everyone was afraid of Master Beaumont, miss. Everyone." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I'll come back tomorrow. We have more to discuss." As she walked back to the main house, Eleanor's mind raced. The ugly suspicion had taken root and wouldn't be dislodged. Had her father fathered Sarah's children? Had he added his own grandchildren to the property ledger, listing them alongside Livestock? Back in the study, Eleanor returned to the registry, examining the entries more closely. There were other young women with children, their value carefully noted, their breeding potential assessed in cold, clinical terms. How had she never seen the true horror of this place? She had been a child when she left, yes, but not so young that she couldn't have understood. Eleanor closed the registry and sat in silence, listening to the big house creaking around her. Tomorrow, she would need to make decisions about the plantation, about the people who were legally her property now, about the moral weight she had inherited along with the wealth. But tonight, a plan was already forming in her mind. Her father was dead, and his sins were not hers to bear, but the responsibility to right his wrongs was. If Sarah's children were indeed her blood relations, that made things both more complicated and clearer in purpose. As dawn approached, Eleanor finally retired to her childhood bedroom, but sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the careful entries in her father's ledger, human beings catalogued like cattle, and her own name at the top of the page, the inheritor of it all. Morning arrived with a chorus of birdsong and the distant sounds of work beginning on the plantation. Eleanor had slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of ledgers with endless columns of names. She dressed quickly, opting for a simple dark dress rather than the elaborate mourning attire expected of a bereaved daughter. At breakfast, served by a silent house servant who wouldn't meet her eyes, Eleanor was joined by Mr. Winters, who had returned to continue their business discussions. "I hope you found everything in order last night," he said, buttering a piece of toast. Eleanor set down her coffee cup. "Not entirely, Mr. Winters. I have questions about some entries in my father's registry." The lawyer looked uncomfortable. "Your father was very thorough in his record-keeping, as I mentioned." "Yes, particularly regarding the children born on this plantation," Eleanor said, watching the man's face carefully. "I noticed some irregularities." Mr. Winters' expression tightened. "Miss Beaumont, if you're implying what I think you are, I must caution you against making such insinuations. Your father was a respected member of the community." "I'm implying nothing, Mr. Winters. I'm asking direct questions about the parentage of certain children listed in my father's property ledger." The lawyer dabbed at his mouth with a napkin, his movements deliberate. "The breeding of slaves is a common plantation practice, Miss Beaumont. Distasteful to northern sensibilities, perhaps, but economically sound." "Breeding," Eleanor repeated, the word bitter in her mouth. "And who determined the pairings?" Mr. Winters stood, gathering his papers. "I believe we should focus on the legal matters at hand. The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow. Until then, I suggest you familiarize yourself with the operations of the plantation. Mr. Davis, the overseer, can assist you." After he left, Eleanor sat alone at the large dining table, her appetite gone. She needed to see more than ledgers and registries. She needed to understand the full scope of what she had inherited. Outside, the day was already hot, the sun climbing in a cloudless sky. Eleanor made her way toward the fields, where cotton grew in neat rows, stretching toward the horizon. As she approached, she saw a man on horseback watching over a group of workers, slaves, picking cotton and placing it in large sacks. "Mr. Davis," she called. The man turned, squinting against the sun. He was middle-aged, weathered by years outdoors, with a hard set to his mouth. "Miss Beaumont," he acknowledged, tipping his hat slightly. "Mr. Winters said you might want to see the operation." "I do," Eleanor confirmed. "Please, show me everything." For the next few hours, Davis led her through the plantation. The fields, the gin house where cotton was processed, the storehouses. He spoke in terms of yield and profit, of efficiency and output. Not once did he refer to the workers as people. They were hands, labor, resources. "Your father ran a tight ship," Davis said with something like pride. "Oakwood produces more cotton per acre than any other plantation in the county." "And how is that accomplished?" Eleanor asked. Davis glanced at her. "Discipline, miss. Clear expectations and consequences." "Show me," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the dread in her stomach. Davis hesitated. "That's not something for a lady to—" "Show me," Eleanor repeated, louder this time. The overseer led her to a small building behind the gin house. Inside, the air was stifling, the windows boarded up. Various implements hung on the walls. Whips of different sizes, chains, metal restraints. "Your father believed in maintaining order," Davis said, watching her face. "Weakness invites chaos." Eleanor fought to keep her expression neutral, though her hands trembled slightly. "And how often are these tools employed?" "As needed," Davis replied, "though less often now than in years past. The message has been well received." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Thank you for your candor, Mr. Davis. I'd like to visit the slave quarters now, alone." Davis frowned. "Miss Beaumont, that's not appropriate for—" "I don't believe I asked for your permission, Mr. Davis," Eleanor interrupted coldly. "I own this plantation now, and I will go where I please." The man's face reddened, but he stepped aside. "As you wish, miss." Eleanor walked away, her heart pounding. She had never spoken to anyone like that before. With such authority, such coldness. It frightened her how easily it had come to her, this assertion of power over others. At the slave quarters, Eleanor moved from cabin to cabin. Some were empty, their occupants out working. In others she found the very young, the elderly, and those working at domestic tasks. She spoke to as many as she could, though most were reluctant to say much beyond yes, miss, and no, miss. She saved Sarah's cabin for last. This time, in daylight, Eleanor could see Sarah more clearly. She was beautiful, with high cheekbones and large, expressive eyes. Her sons were playing on the dirt floor with crude wooden toys, handsome boys with light brown skin, their features a haunting echo of faces in the Beaumont family portraits. "Miss Eleanor," Sarah acknowledged, her manner more reserved than the night before. "Sarah," Eleanor said softly, "I want to speak with you privately. Is there somewhere we can go?" Sarah glanced at her children, then at an older woman sitting in the corner. "Aunt Martha can watch the boys. We can walk a bit." They stepped outside, walking slowly toward a stand of trees at the edge of the quarters. Neither spoke until they were well away from the cabins. "Those ledgers you found," Sarah finally said, her voice low. "What did they tell you?" Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face the younger woman. "They told me that my father catalogued human beings like animals, that he assessed the value of children based on their potential as workers or breeders." She paused, then added, "They told me that your sons were born when you were very young. What they didn't tell me was who their father is." Sarah looked away toward the distant fields. "What would change if you knew?" "Everything," Eleanor said simply. Sarah was silent for a long moment, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet, Eleanor had to lean in to hear. "Your father took me to the big house when I was 16, said I was to be a house servant like my mother before me. But that wasn't all he wanted." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. When the first baby came," Sarah continued as if she hadn't heard, "he was pleased, said it increased his investment. When the second came, he added them both to his books, his own flesh and blood, Miss Eleanor. He knew what he was doing." But the confirmation of Eleanor's suspicions hit her like a physical blow. Did anyone else know? Mr. Winters? Davis? They suspected, I think. But no one speaks against Master Beaumont. No one. Eleanor felt sick with rage. At her father, at the system that enabled him, at her own ignorance and absence. "Listen to me, Sarah," she said urgently. "I need to tell you something. My father's will is being read tomorrow. I don't know what it contains, but whatever happens, I want you to know that I'm going to find a way to help you and your sons." Sarah's eyes, when they met Eleanor's, were filled with a desperate hope she was clearly trying to suppress. "Miss Eleanor, you don't understand what it's like here, the things that happen when northern visitors leave. The promises that get forgotten. I'm not just a visitor," Eleanor said firmly, "and I won't forget." They walked back to the cabins in silence. Before they parted, Eleanor asked one more question. "Sarah, do you know where my father kept his important papers? Not the ones in his study, but personal documents." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "There's a hidden compartment in the library, behind the painting of your grandfather. I've seen him open it." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "I'll come find you after the will reading tomorrow." Back at the main house, Eleanor waited until the servants were occupied elsewhere, then went to the library. The painting Sarah had mentioned dominated one wall, a formidable portrait of Jefferson Beaumont, Eleanor's grandfather, the man who had established Oakwood Plantation. Carefully, Eleanor removed the heavy frame from the wall. Behind it, as Sarah had said, was a small door built into the paneling, with a tiny keyhole. Eleanor didn't have the key, but she remembered something from her childhood, a trick her mother had taught her for opening locked jewelry boxes. From her hair, Eleanor removed a pin and manipulated it in the lock. After several tense minutes, she heard a click, and the door swung open. Inside was a stack of documents, letters, deeds, and a sealed envelope with last will and testament written across it in her father's hand. This wasn't the official will that Mr. Winters would read tomorrow. This was something else. Eleanor's hands trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. Being of sound mind, the document began in formal language. I, William Beaumont, hereby set forth my true wishes regarding my estate, separate from the legal document to be executed by my attorney. As Eleanor read further, her breath caught. The document was dated just 3 months ago, when her father must have known he was dying. In it, he acknowledged Sarah's children as his own and expressed his wish that they, along with their mother, be manumitted upon his death. Let this serve as my confession and my attempt at atonement, the document concluded, though it comes too late to right the wrongs I have committed. Eleanor sat back, stunned. Her father had known. In his final months, facing death, he had recognized his sins, not enough to make amends in life, but enough to try to set something right after his death. But why hadn't he given this document to Mr. Winters? Why hide it behind a painting? The answer came as Eleanor searched through the remaining papers. Letters from other plantation owners threatening consequences if William Beaumont proceeded with his dangerous notions. A note from Mr. Winters himself, advising against manumission as it would destabilize the entire county and invite retribution. Her father had been afraid of his peers, of social ostracism, of violence against himself or possibly against Sarah and the children. Eleanor carefully returned the will to its envelope and placed it in her pocket. The other papers she returned to the compartment, closing it and rehanging the painting. Tomorrow Mr. Winters would read the official will, the one that conformed to society's expectations. But now Eleanor had leverage, a legal document in her father's hand that acknowledged his children and expressed his wishes for their freedom. It wasn't enough to erase his crimes. Nothing could do that, but it was a weapon Eleanor could use in the battle that was surely coming. As evening fell, Eleanor sat in her father's study, thinking about Sarah and her children, her half-brothers, Eleanor corrected herself, her family, however unwillingly created. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Davis, the overseer. "Miss Beaumont," he said, his expression unreadable. "I saw you walking with Sarah today." Eleanor's spine stiffened. "Yes. Is there something you wish to say about that, Mr. Davis?" The man stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I think you should know that your father had specific arrangements regarding that girl and her children." "Did he?" Eleanor's voice was ice. "They were valuable to him," Davis continued. "He had plans for them, plans that benefited the plantation." "I'm aware of my father's plans," Eleanor said carefully, "but he's dead now, and I will make my own decisions regarding my inheritance." Davis's face hardened. "Miss Beaumont, you've been away a long time. You don't understand how things work here. There are expectations, traditions. People won't take kindly to northern ideas being imposed on Mississippi soil." "Is that a threat, Mr. Davis?" It's a reality," he replied. "Your father understood that reality. That's why he was respected." Eleanor stood, facing the overseer directly. "My father is dead, Mr. Davis. And tomorrow, after the will reading, we will discuss your continued employment at Oakwood. Until then, I suggest you attend to your duties, which do not include advising me on matters beyond your concern." Davis's hands clenched at his sides, his face flushing with anger. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might strike her. Instead, he gave a stiff nod and left the room, closing the door with more force than necessary. Eleanor released a shaky breath. She had made an enemy, the first of many, she suspected. The path ahead would be dangerous, not just for her, but for Sarah and the children as well. As darkness fell over Oakwood Plantation, Eleanor felt the weight of history and expectation pressing down on her. Tomorrow, the official reading of the will would either give her the legal authority to make changes, or it would reveal new obstacles to overcome. Either way, she had made her decision. The Beaumont legacy of cruelty and exploitation would end with her father. Whatever it cost her, she would find a way to free Sarah and her sons, her brothers, and begin to atone for the sins of her family. The morning of the will reading dawned grey and threatening, dark clouds hanging low over Oakwood Plantation. Eleanor dressed carefully in black silk, her hair arranged simply. She needed to appear the proper Southern heiress today, regardless of the turmoil within her. When she entered the drawing room, Mr. Winters was already waiting, along with 3 other men she didn't recognize. "Miss Beaumont," Winters said, rising, "allow me to introduce Judge Harlow, who will oversee the reading, Mr. Peterson, your father's banker, and Mr. Caldwell, a business associate of your father's." Eleanor nodded to each man in turn, noting their assessing gazes. They saw a young woman alone, perhaps easily manipulated or intimidated. She would need to disabuse them of that notion quickly. "Gentlemen," she said, taking a seat, "shall we proceed?" Mr. Winters cleared his throat and opened a leather portfolio, removing several sheets of paper. "This is the last will and testament of William James Beaumont, dated April 15th, 1837. As Winters read the formal opening statements, Eleanor observed the men in the room. Judge Harlow looked bored, having likely presided over countless such readings. Peterson the banker was attentive, clearly interested in the financial aspects about to be revealed. But it was Caldwell who concerned Eleanor. The way he watched her, calculating, almost predatory, made her skin crawl. "To my daughter, Eleanor Catherine Beaumont," Winters continued, "I leave Oakwood Plantation in its entirety, including all lands, structures, equipment, livestock, and human property currently attached to said plantation." Eleanor maintained her composure, though the phrase human property sent a wave of revulsion through her. "However," Winters emphasized, looking up from the document, "this bequest comes with conditions." The room seemed to still, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "Miss Beaumont must take up residence at Oakwood for a period of no less than 1 year, during which time she will receive instruction in the management of the plantation from my trusted associates, Mr. James Caldwell and Mr. Thomas Davis." Caldwell smiled slightly, a satisfied expression that confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. This had been arranged. "Furthermore," Winters continued, "no slave currently owned by the estate may be sold, freed, or removed from the plantation during this period without the written consent of both aforementioned trustees." Eleanor's fingers dug into the arms of her chair. Her father had effectively imprisoned her at Oakwood for a year, while placing control of the plantation and the people on it in the hands of men like Caldwell and Davis. Should Miss Beaumont refuse these conditions or fail to fulfill them to the satisfaction of the trustees, Oakwood Plantation will pass in its entirety to Mr. James Caldwell, with the provision that he maintain the property as a working plantation for a minimum of 10 years. The room fell silent as Winters folded the papers. Eleanor could feel all eyes on her, waiting for her reaction. "Is that all, Mr. Winters?" she asked, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "There are additional minor bequests to servants and associates, but regarding the main estate, yes," the lawyer confirmed. Eleanor nodded slowly. "I see. My father was thorough in his arrangements." "Your father was a wise man," Caldwell interjected, speaking for the first time. "He understood that a young woman raised in the North might not immediately grasp the complexities of managing a plantation. These provisions are for your protection, Miss Beaumont." "How considerate," Eleanor replied, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. "And as one of my protectors, Mr. Caldwell, what exactly will your duties entail?" Caldwell smiled again, revealing teeth stained by tobacco. "I'll be overseeing the business aspects, cotton sales, equipment purchases, that sort of thing. Davis will handle the daily operations, including the slaves." "I see." Eleanor turned to Winters. "And if I were to contest this will?" The lawyer looked uncomfortable. "You could try, Miss Beaumont, but your father's document is legally sound. Judge Harlow can confirm this." The judge nodded gravely. "I've reviewed the will carefully, Miss Beaumont. It would be very difficult to challenge successfully." Eleanor knew they were right. Mississippi law would favor her father's wishes, especially when those wishes aligned with preserving the institution that underpinned the state's economy. But she had an ace up her sleeve, the hidden will, with its confession and instructions for manumission. She could reveal it now, but something held her back. Instinct told her that showing her hand too early would be dangerous. "I'll need time to consider my options," she said finally. "How long do I have to accept or reject these terms?" 30 days, Winters replied, "after which, if no decision is made, the inheritance passes to Mr. Caldwell by default." "Very well." Eleanor rose. "Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Mr. Winters, I'll be in touch." As the men filed out, Caldwell lingered, approaching Eleanor when the others had left. "Miss Beaumont," he said, his voice low, "your father and I were close. He confided in me about many things, including his concerns about your northern sensibilities potentially disrupting the natural order here." Eleanor met his gaze coldly. "Did he? How interesting that my father would discuss me with a virtual stranger when he barely corresponded with me directly." "Hardly a stranger, Miss Beaumont. I've known your father for 20 years. We had many mutual interests." Caldwell paused, then added, "I knew Sarah's mother as well." The implication was clear. Caldwell knew about Sarah and the children and was using that knowledge as leverage. "Mr. Caldwell," Eleanor said carefully, "whatever you think you know about my family's affairs, remember that I am my father's daughter. I may have been raised in Boston, but Beaumont blood runs in my veins." Caldwell smiled, apparently pleased by her show of spirit. "Indeed it does, Miss Beaumont. Indeed it does. I look forward to our collaboration." After he left, Eleanor sank back into her chair, her mind racing. The will had created a trap: accept and be controlled by men like Caldwell and Davis for a year, or refuse and lose everything, including any chance to help Sarah and her children. There had to be another way. Eleanor needed to speak with Sarah again. But first, she wanted to learn more about James Caldwell. If he had been her father's associate for 20 years, there would be records of their dealings. Returning to her father's study, Eleanor began methodically searching through correspondence and ledgers. Hours passed as she pieced together the relationship between her father and Caldwell. They had partnered on land purchases, equipment investments, and, just most disturbingly, slave trading operations. One letter in particular caught her attention. "William, the girl Sarah continues to show promise. As we discussed, her first offspring has excellent conformation and will command a premium price when of age. I recommend similar selective breeding for your other female stock of comparable quality." Eleanor felt physically ill. Caldwell hadn't just known about Sarah. He had been actively involved in planning the breeding of slaves for profit, including her father's assault of Sarah. This was worse than she had imagined. Caldwell wouldn't just resist any attempt to free Sarah and her children. He was personally invested in their continued enslavement. As evening approached, Eleanor slipped out of the main house and made her way to Sarah's cabin. She found the young woman alone, her sons having been taken by Aunt Martha to a prayer meeting in another cabin. "Miss Eleanor," Sarah said, rising quickly from where she had been mending a shirt, "I didn't expect you tonight." "I need to speak with you," Eleanor said urgently. "The will reading was today. It's complicated." Quickly, Eleanor explained the provisions of the official will, watching Sarah's face fall as she described the control granted to Caldwell and Davis. "But I found something else," Eleanor continued, lowering her voice. "A second will hidden behind the painting, just where you said it would be. In it, my father acknowledges his paternity and directs that you and the boys be freed." Sarah's eyes widened. "He wrote that down. Truly?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "But there's a problem. The official will is the legally binding one. And even if I could somehow enforce the secret will, Caldwell knows about you and the children. He was involved in—" Eleanor hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "In my father's plans regarding you." Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "I know Mr. Caldwell. He comes to the plantation sometimes, looks at all of us like he's at a market." She paused, then added softly, "He watches my boys, says they'll make fine workers one day." Eleanor felt a surge of protective fury. "Sarah, I won't let that happen. But I need to be careful. If I reveal the secret will now, Caldwell will find a way to challenge it. And Davis, I don't trust him either." "You can't trust any of them, Miss Eleanor," Sarah said fervently. "Not the lawyer, not the overseer, not the hands that work for them. They all have something to lose if things change." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I need to accept the terms of the official will, at least for now. It gives me time to figure out a solution. But I'm worried about you and the boys. If Caldwell or Davis suspects that I know the truth, they might—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Separate us," Sarah supplied, her voice flat. "Sell the boys. It happens." "I won't let it," Eleanor insisted. "But we need to be cautious. Can you trust anyone here? Anyone who might help if you needed to leave quickly?" Sarah was silent for a long moment, considering. "There's a man, Samuel. He works in the stables. His brother escaped 2 years ago, made it north. They correspond sometimes, though it's dangerous." "Good," Eleanor said. "Don't approach him yet, but keep it in mind. For now, go on as normal. Don't let anyone see us talking like this. I'll find ways to communicate with you." As Eleanor turned to leave, Sarah caught her arm. "Miss Eleanor, why are you doing this? You could just sell the plantation, go back north, forget about all of this." Eleanor looked at the young woman, her father's victim, her own half-sister in truth, if not in law. "Because those boys are my brothers," she said simply. "And your family too, Sarah. What my father did to you was unforgivable. I can't undo it, but I can try to make something right out of all this wrong." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Be careful, Miss Eleanor. Men like Caldwell and Davis, they don't see women as equals. They'll underestimate you, but they're dangerous when threatened." "I know," Eleanor said grimly. "That's what I'm counting on." Back at the main house, Eleanor found Davis waiting for her in the entrance hall. "Where have you been, Miss Beaumont?" he demanded, his tone just short of insolent. "Walking the grounds," Eleanor replied coolly. "I'm trying to familiarize myself with my inheritance." Davis's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Caldwell told me about the will's provisions. I'll be expecting to meet with you tomorrow morning to begin reviewing the plantation operations in detail." "Of course," Eleanor agreed, forcing a smile. "I'm eager to learn, Mr. Davis." The overseer seemed surprised by her acquiescence. "Good. 8 o'clock then, in your father's study." After he left, Eleanor went to her room and locked the door. She needed to plan carefully. For the next year, she would have to play a difficult role. The southern heiress learning to manage her inheritance, gradually winning the confidence of men like Davis and Caldwell, while secretly planning a way to free Sarah and her children. It would be dangerous. If her true intentions were discovered, she could lose everything, and worse, she could put Sarah and the boys in grave danger. But what alternative did she have? She couldn't abandon them. She couldn't return to Boston and pretend she didn't know the truth about her family's wealth, built on human suffering. As rain began to patter against the windows, Eleanor sat at her writing desk and began a letter to her aunt in Boston. She would need allies in the north if her plan was to succeed, and she would need money, her own money, separate from the plantation's assets, which would be controlled by Caldwell. "Dearest Aunt Margaret," she wrote, "I find myself in a difficult situation that requires both discretion and assistance." Eleanor wrote well into the night, detailing everything she had discovered and outlining what she needed. When she finished, she sealed the letter carefully. She would find a way to post it privately, away from the prying eyes of Oakwood Plantation. Outside, the rain had become a downpour, thunder rolling across the Mississippi sky. Eleanor stood at the window, watching lightning illuminate the slave cabins in brief, stark flashes. Somewhere out there, Sarah and her sons were sleeping, 3 lives now inextricably bound to her own. "I will find a way," Eleanor whispered to the storm, "whatever it takes." The weeks that followed the reading of the will were a delicate dance of deception. Eleanor played her part with care, attending to Davis's instructions on plantation management, listening to Caldwell's lectures on cotton markets and slave economies, and presenting herself as a dutiful daughter, reluctantly accepting her inheritance. All the while, she watched and learned, identifying potential allies and cataloguing vulnerabilities in the system that kept Oakwood running. She established a routine of morning walks, ostensibly for her health, which allowed her to observe the plantation in operation and occasionally exchange brief, careful words with Sarah. Eleanor also cultivated relationships with the house servants, particularly an elderly cook named Bessie, who had been at Oakwood since Eleanor was a child. "You different now, Miss Eleanor," Bessie observed one afternoon, as Eleanor helped her shell peas in the kitchen, an activity that had scandalized the overseer's wife when she heard of it. "How so?" Eleanor asked. Bessie's weathered hands never paused in their work. "You see things now. When you was a child you looked but didn't see. Now your eyes is open." "Yes," Eleanor agreed quietly. "They are." Bessie nodded, satisfied. "Good. About time somebody in this house had open eyes." It was the closest anyone had come to openly acknowledging Eleanor's changing attitudes, and it gave her hope that there might be more allies within Oakwood than she had initially thought. Meanwhile, Eleanor had received a response from her aunt in Boston, a carefully worded letter that nevertheless confirmed Margaret's willingness to help. More importantly, it included information about a contact in Natchez, a northern businessman named Frederick Hayes, who secretly supported the abolitionist cause. On a rare trip into town, chaperoned by Davis's wife, Eleanor managed to slip away long enough to meet with Hayes at his office. "Your aunt speaks highly of you, Miss Beaumont," Hayes said, after verifying her identity. "She says you're involved in a delicate situation." "Very delicate," Eleanor confirmed, "and potentially dangerous. I need to arrange transport for 3 people from Mississippi to Boston, without official documentation." Hayes's expression remained neutral. "That's a serious undertaking. May I ask why you're involving yourself in such a matter?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because the people in question are my blood relations, whether the law recognizes them or not." The businessman studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I understand. It will take time to arrange, perhaps a month or more, and it will be expensive." "I have funds," Eleanor assured him. Her aunt had included bank drafts that Eleanor could cash discreetly. "It's not just money," Hayes warned. "There's significant risk. If you're caught assisting runaway slaves, the penalties are severe, even for a woman of your social standing." "I'm aware," Eleanor said grimly. "But the alternative is to do nothing, which I cannot accept." They agreed on a communication system. Messages would be passed through a particular shopkeeper in town, using innocuous language about fabric orders that would mean nothing to anyone who intercepted them. As Eleanor left Hayes's office, she felt both relief and trepidation. The wheels were in motion, but the most dangerous part of her plan was yet to come. Back at Oakwood, Caldwell had taken up semi-permanent residence, occupying the guest suite and inserting himself into every aspect of plantation management. His presence made Eleanor deeply uncomfortable, especially the way his eyes followed Sarah whenever she came to the main house on errands. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner during which Caldwell had expounded at length on the natural inferiority of African peoples, Eleanor retired early, claiming a headache. In truth, she needed to check on Sarah, who had sent word through Bessie that one of her sons was ill. Waiting until the house quieted, Eleanor slipped out through the kitchen door. The night was moonless, providing good cover as she made her way to the slave quarters. She had just reached Sarah's cabin when a voice spoke from the darkness. "Out for another evening stroll, Miss Beaumont." Eleanor froze, her heart racing, as James Caldwell stepped into view, a lantern in one hand, a pistol in the other. "Mr. Caldwell?" she acknowledged, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You startled me." "Curious time for a lady to be wandering about," Caldwell observed, raising the lantern to better illuminate her face. "Particularly in this direction." "One of the children is ill," Eleanor said, deciding that a partial truth was better than an obvious lie. "I brought medicine." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "How maternal of you. Which child would that be?" "Sarah's younger boy," Eleanor replied, watching his reaction carefully. "Thomas." Something flickered in Caldwell's expression. A calculation. An assessment. "Interesting that you take such a personal interest in that particular woman's offspring," he said softly. "One might almost think there was a connection." Eleanor's blood ran cold. He knew, or at least he strongly suspected. "All the people on this plantation are my responsibility now," she said, keeping her voice level, "including the children." Caldwell smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "Indeed they are. But let me offer you some advice, Miss Beaumont. Property is to be managed, not coddled. Sentiment leads to poor business decisions." "I'll keep that in mind," Eleanor replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have medicine to deliver." She moved to step around him, but Caldwell shifted, blocking her path. "I knew your father for many years, Miss Beaumont. He was a practical man who understood how the world works. He had weaknesses, as all men do, but he never let them interfere with business." "What exactly are you implying, Mr. Caldwell?" Eleanor demanded, her patience wearing thin. Caldwell leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm implying that I know exactly why those boys look the way they do. Your father confided in me, you see. We had similar interests." Eleanor felt physically ill at the implication, but she held her ground. "Whatever you think you know, Mr. Caldwell, remember that under the terms of my father's will, I am the owner of Oakwood Plantation. You are merely an advisor, whose services I can dispense with if necessary." Caldwell chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Brave words. But we both know the will gives me considerable power for the next year, enough time for many things to change." He paused, then added with chilling deliberation, "Children can be sold separately from their mothers, you know. There's a high demand for promising young boys in the Deep South." It took every ounce of Eleanor's self-control not to react to the thinly veiled threat. "Is that what you did with your own offspring, Mr. Caldwell? Sell them for profit?" The question struck home. Caldwell's face contorted with anger, and for a moment Eleanor thought he might strike her. Instead, he stepped back, regaining his composure. "You play a dangerous game, Miss Beaumont," he said softly. "I suggest you reconsider your position. Boston is a long way from Mississippi, and you have few friends here." With that, he turned and walked back toward the main house, the light of his lantern receding into the darkness. Eleanor remained motionless, her heart pounding, until she was certain he was gone. Then she hurried to Sarah's cabin, knocking softly. Sarah opened the door, her face pale with worry. "Miss Eleanor, you shouldn't be here. Caldwell was just—" "I know," Eleanor interrupted, stepping inside. "I encountered him. How is Thomas?" The boy lay on the pallet, his small face flushed with fever. His older brother sat beside him, watching with solemn eyes. "The fever rose this afternoon," Sarah explained, returning to her son's side. "I've been giving him willow bark tea, but it hasn't helped much." Eleanor knelt beside the child, placing a hand on his forehead. "He's burning up. Has the doctor been to see him?" Sarah's bitter laugh was answer enough. "Doctors don't come for slave children, Miss Eleanor. Davis said to let him sweat it out. If he survives, he survives." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "That's barbaric. I'll send for Dr. Wilson first thing tomorrow." "Then how will you explain that to Caldwell?" Sarah asked, her voice low. "He's watching us, Miss Eleanor. He knows." "Let me worry about Caldwell," Eleanor said grimly. "For now, let's focus on Thomas." She opened the small bag she had brought, removing a bottle of fever medicine she had taken from the house's supplies. Throughout the night, Eleanor and Sarah took turns administering the medicine and bathing the child with cool water. By dawn, Thomas's fever had broken, and he slept peacefully. "I need to return to the house before I'm missed." Eleanor said, gathering her things. But listen carefully, Sarah. Caldwell threatened to separate you from the boys. We need to accelerate our plans. Sarah's face drained of color. When? I'm not sure yet. My contact in Natchez is still making arrangements. But I want you to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Pack only what you absolutely need. Food, warm clothing for the children. Keep it hidden but accessible. What about Samuel? Sarah asked, referring to the stable hand with abolitionist connections. Should I speak to him? Eleanor hesitated. Not yet. The fewer people involved, the safer for everyone. But if something happens to me, if I'm unable to help you directly, then yes, go to Samuel. As Eleanor slipped back into the main house through the kitchen, she found Bessie already at work, kneading bread dough with strong, practiced hands. Caldwell was looking for you last night, the old woman said without preamble. Had a strange look about him. We spoke, Eleanor acknowledged, washing her hands at the pump. He's a dangerous man, Bessie. All men with power over others are dangerous, Bessie replied. Some just hide it better than others. Over the following days, Eleanor maintained her charade of compliance while secretly accelerating her plans. She made another trip to Natchez, this time accompanied only by a young house servant she had reason to trust, and met again with Frederick Hayes. The arrangements are nearly complete, Hayes informed her, but there's been a complication. Slave patrols have increased along the usual routes north. We'll need to delay for at least 2 weeks to establish a safer path. We may not have 2 weeks, Eleanor said urgently. The situation has become more volatile. Is there no other option? Hayes considered this. There is one possibility. A steamboat captain I know who carries cargo to Cincinnati. He's sympathetic to the cause and has concealed passengers before. But it's risky, a more public route with more opportunities for discovery. When does his boat depart? Eleanor asked. 3 days from now. But Miss Beaumont, I must emphasize the danger. If we wait, the danger may be greater still, Eleanor interrupted. Make the arrangements with the captain. I'll handle the rest. Back at Oakwood, Eleanor found the atmosphere increasingly tense. Davis watched her with undisguised suspicion, and Caldwell had become more overtly threatening in his comments. At dinner, he spoke casually about a neighboring plantation where a slave insurrection had been put down with appropriate force. The owner was too lenient, Caldwell remarked, watching Eleanor's reaction. Allowed his people to develop ideas above their station. A mistake he won't make again, I assure you. The message was clear. Caldwell was warning her about the consequences of challenging the established order. That night, Eleanor was awakened by a soft knock at her bedroom door. Opening it cautiously, she found Bessie standing in the hallway, her face grave. You need to come quick, the old woman whispered. Davis has taken Sarah to the gin house. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The gin house was where punishments were administered. The children? With me, Bessie assured her. But hurry. Throwing a shawl over her nightdress, Eleanor followed Bessie through the darkened house and across the yard. As they approached the gin house, Eleanor could hear Davis's voice, raised in anger. You've been planning something with her, haven't you? Tell me the truth, girl. Eleanor pushed open the door to see Sarah tied to a post, her dress torn at the back, while Davis stood over her with a whip. Stop! Eleanor commanded, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. What is the meaning of this? Davis turned, his face flushed with anger and something else, embarrassment at being caught, perhaps. This doesn't concern you, Miss Beaumont. Return to the house. Everything on this plantation concerns me, Eleanor countered, moving to stand between Davis and Sarah. Untie her, now. She was caught with these, Davis said, gesturing to a small bundle on a nearby table. Provisions, a map, money. She was planning to run. Eleanor glanced at the items, her mind racing. This complicated things enormously, but she couldn't abandon Sarah now. And you took it upon yourself to punish her without consulting me, Eleanor asked, her tone icy. I am the owner of this plantation, Mr. Davis, not you. Caldwell said. Mr. Caldwell is not the owner either, Eleanor interrupted. Now untie her, or you will be seeking employment elsewhere tomorrow." For a moment Davis looked like he might refuse, but something in Eleanor's expression must have convinced him she was serious. Grudgingly, he untied Sarah, who slumped against the post, her breathing ragged. "Go back to the house, Mr. Davis," Eleanor ordered. "We will discuss your conduct in the morning." After Davis left, Eleanor helped Sarah to her feet. "Are you badly hurt?" "He only struck once before you came," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry, Miss Eleanor. I shouldn't have kept those things in the cabin. I was afraid." "It's all right," Eleanor soothed, "but we need to move quickly now. Davis will tell Caldwell, and things will become much more dangerous." They made their way to Bessie's cabin, where the children were waiting, wide-eyed with fear. "We need to leave tonight," Eleanor said decisively. "The steamboat won't depart for 3 days, but we can't wait here. It's too risky now." "Where will we go?" Sarah asked. "There's a church in Natchez. The pastor is part of Hayes's network. You'll stay there until the boat departs." Bessie, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "You can't just walk off the plantation with them, Miss Eleanor. They'll be looking now." "I know," Eleanor acknowledged. "That's why we need a distraction." The plan came together quickly. Bessie would create a commotion in the main house, a small, controlled kitchen fire that would draw attention and create confusion. Meanwhile, Eleanor would drive Sarah and the children to Natchez in a cart, using back roads to avoid detection. "What about you?" Sarah asked. "If they discover you helped us." "I'll return before I'm missed," Eleanor said, though she knew the risk was significant. "Once you're safely away, I can handle Caldwell and Davis." As they prepared to put the plan into motion, Eleanor took Sarah aside. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. "I have the proof of your son's parentage. My father's written confession. Once you're safely in the north, I'll use it to legally establish their free status. They will never have to fear being reclaimed." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you risking so much for us?" Eleanor looked at the young woman, her half-sister in truth, though the law would never recognize it. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said simply, "and because you and your children deserve freedom. My father's crimes can never be undone, but perhaps some small portion of the damage can be repaired." Uri. An hour later, as smoke rose from the kitchen wing of the main house and shouts of alarm echoed across the plantation yard, a cart carrying Sarah and her sons slipped away from Oakwood through a seldom-used back gate. Eleanor drove, her heart pounding with each creak of the wheels, expecting at any moment to hear pursuers behind them, but the distraction worked. By the time the small fire was extinguished and a head count revealed the missing slaves, Eleanor, Sarah, and the children were miles away, traveling through the darkness toward Natchez and the promise of freedom. In the city, Hayes was waiting at the church as arranged. He looked alarmed when Eleanor arrived with Sarah and the children 3 days ahead of schedule. "What happened?" he demanded. "Plans changed," Eleanor said tersely. "They were discovered. We had no choice but to leave immediately." Hayes helped them inside, where the pastor showed them to a hidden room beneath the church floor, a station on the Underground Railroad that had sheltered dozens of escaping slaves. "The steamboat leaves tomorrow at dawn," Hayes informed them. "Captain Miller will take you aboard before the other passengers. You'll be concealed in a cargo compartment until the boat is well upriver." Eleanor knelt before Sarah's sons, looking into their solemn faces. "You're going on an adventure," she told them gently. "A long journey to a place where you can be free, where no one can ever own you or separate you from your mother." The older boy, James, regarded her seriously. "Will you come with us, Miss Eleanor?" Eleanor shook her head, her throat tight with emotion. "No, James. I have to go back to make sure no one follows you, but someday, when it's safe, I'll come find you in Boston." To Sarah, she gave a packet containing money, letters of introduction to her aunt, and most importantly, a copy of her father's secret will, acknowledging his paternity. "Keep this safe," Eleanor instructed. "In Boston, find a lawyer named William Lloyd Garrison. He'll know how to use this document to establish the boy's legal freedom." Sarah embraced Eleanor fiercely. We will never forget what you've done for us. Live free, Eleanor whispered. That's all I ask. As dawn approached, Eleanor prepared to return to Oakwood. She knew what awaited her: Caldwell's rage, possibly legal consequences for helping slaves escape. But she had one final card to play. Back at the plantation, as expected, she found chaos. Davis and a group of men were preparing to ride out in search of the escapees, while Caldwell paced the drawing room in cold fury. "Where are they?" he demanded as soon as Eleanor entered. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Eleanor replied calmly. "Don't play games with me," Caldwell snarled. "Sarah and her brats are gone, and so were you. Did you think no one would notice?" Eleanor removed her shawl, draping it carefully over a chair. "I received an urgent message from Natchez, business regarding my father's estate. I left immediately. As for Sarah, perhaps she finally decided she preferred freedom to slavery. I can hardly blame her." Caldwell crossed the room in 2 strides, his face inches from hers. "You're lying. You helped them escape. That's a crime in Mississippi, Miss Beaumont. A serious crime, even for someone of your station." "Prove it," Eleanor challenged. "But before you make accusations, Mr. Caldwell, you might want to consider this." She withdrew a folded document from her pocket, the original of her father's secret will, with its confession and instructions for manumission. "My father's true will," she explained, watching Caldwell's face carefully. "In it he acknowledges that Sarah's children are his own, and directs that they be freed upon his death. It also details his business arrangements with you, Mr. Caldwell, including your joint venture in selective breeding of slaves for profit." Caldwell's face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I have it, and copies have been sent to certain individuals in both Mississippi and Massachusetts to be opened if anything happens to me." It was a bluff. The copies had been sent, but they wouldn't be opened automatically. Still, Caldwell couldn't know that. "You think this protects you?" he hissed. "One document won't change anything. The entire system stands against what you're doing." "Perhaps," Eleanor agreed, "but scandal and exposure might change your standing in the community. How would your business associates react to learning of your personal involvement in plantation matters? How would your wife feel?" Caldwell stared at her, hatred burning in his eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Beaumont." "No, Mr. Caldwell. I'm ending the game my father started. Now I suggest you gather your belongings and leave Oakwood. Your services as trustee are no longer required. The will stipulates that I must receive instruction in plantation management," Eleanor interrupted. "It doesn't specify from whom. I'll find other advisors, ones who understand that changes are coming, whether Mississippi is ready for them or not." For a long moment, the two regarded each other in silence, the balance of power between them shifting irrevocably. Finally, Caldwell gave a curt nod. "This isn't over," he warned. "For you, at Oakwood, it is," Eleanor replied firmly. After Caldwell left, Eleanor stood alone in her father's study, surrounded by the trappings of the system she had begun to dismantle. Sarah and her sons were on their way to freedom, the first, but not the last, of the people of Oakwood to make that journey if Eleanor had her way. The road ahead would be difficult. Caldwell would seek revenge, the neighboring plantation owners would resist change, and the laws of Mississippi would continue to stand against her efforts. But Eleanor Beaumont had discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed, the courage to confront the sins of her father and to begin the long necessary work of atonement. Outside the window, the sun rose over Oakwood Plantation, its light touching the fields and cabins and woods. In Boston, Sarah and her sons would soon see a different sunrise, the dawn of their lives as free people. For now, that knowledge was enough to sustain Eleanor through whatever challenges lay ahead. The cycle of brutality that had begun with her grandfather and continued through her father had been broken. Not completely, not perfectly, but significantly. The names of James and Thomas would never appear in a property ledger alongside Livestock again. And that, Eleanor thought as she watched the new day begin, was a start.